Thank you for joining this session, and during it we're going to have a look at Morpheus and understand the core functionality of how somebody would use it in their daily work. Morpheus is a cloud management platform, and it allows us to connect to multiple clouds at the same time and then automate the process of building new resources into those clouds, be they public or private clouds, and then also manage those through their life cycle and also report on costs and usage. We'll cover a lot of this during the demo, but this isn't showing off every single feature. It's more to give you a concept of what Morpheus can be used for. I'm going to log in and I'm going to be using the browser interface, but a couple of things just to mention just before we start is Morpheus, as well as having the browser interface, also has a full command line and a full API. This is really useful to know because Morpheus really is a platform and can be extended and used as part of an automation flow, and also to engage with other applications and services outside of direct Morpheus. The other thing is the architecture of Morpheus itself as a platform. It is a fully scalable application. It's a Linux application, runs on top of a number of flavors of Linux, and is installed and can be run as a single Linux box, or can be scaled out to support very large workloads either in the enterprise or in managed service provider environments. Now I'm going to start by logging in. I'm actually going to log into the master tenant here and in as a full administrator, and I'm actually going to log in as a local user. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes, the ability to integrate with external identity management tools. But for the moment, I'm just going to log in as a local user. So I have my credentials and log in, and I get a dashboard. Now we will be coming back to this dashboard later on, but we're not going to be able to go through every single feature. But as you can see, there's a lot of information in here, and I just want to sort of, for the first part of this demo, really help us focus down onto the sort of core functionality. So I'm going to use a capability of Morpheus which is built in, which is multi-tenancy. So I'm going to click on the tenant here, and we're going to drop in, and here are all the tenants that are currently in this Morpheus environment. Tenants are great. The capability is really useful. It's a very important part of our role-based access control. It gives you the ability to separate users into particular areas of infrastructure. They will only see workloads they're allowed to see that are only relevant to them. They'll only be able to use infrastructure that you've allocated to them, or they've added in themselves directly inside their tenant account. There are other methods for separating usage within Morpheus as well once you're inside a tenant, including groups and roles, and we'll be talking about those as we go through. Like I say, tenants are really useful. So if you're an enterprise, it's really useful for separating departments, different project teams, and people working in different ways that you want to separate out. And for our managed service providers, it's a great way of managing your separate customers. I'm actually going to use one of the tenants here, Pied Piper. They're one of our flagship customers here in our demo land, and I've clicked on the user list, and I can see all the users. A user always has a record in Morpheus, and these are the users that have logged in and done things within the tenancy. And that, of course, needs to be there because they'll have resources that are allocated to them. They'll have done actions in here that will be in the audit database. So there's always a user record. But how they log in, how they get connected to Morpheus can be done in a couple of different ways. So one, which you saw me use already, is the ability to use local login. So Morpheus has built-in capability to manage users, manage passwords, including things like password complexity, expiry, and also two-factor authentication. And then a user can be allocated to Morpheus roles directly inside Morpheus. And we'll talk about roles again in a few minutes. But the other way that you can authenticate users into Morpheus is using an external identity management. So I'm just going to click on an option here, identity source, and if I click on this in here, what you can see is we have the ability to integrate into a number of external tools to do the identity management. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this because this is a great example of what we refer to as a codeless integration. It's an integration built into Morpheus that allows me to connect to an external service, in this case an identity management tool, and interact with it. In this case, request is a user authorized to use Morpheus, and if so, let them in. And this you will see, and I will mention it many, many times, because this is also how we do things like our cloud integrations, how we integrate into load balancers, backup tools, configuration management tools, ITSM tools. So a very important part of the Morpheus platform is the ability to integrate into these external services that you may already be using or be planning to use in the future as part of your overall system process. So I'm just going to pick on one that most people are familiar with, is Active Directory. So I define that I want to use Active Directory to authenticate users into this tenancy. I then would put in a location to access the Active Directory server that I want to use. I would give Morpheus the credentials of a user with the correct role to authenticate other users. And then on the right-hand side here, I would then start mapping my Active Directory groups to my Morpheus roles. And there's a few options around this. I'm going to go too deep into it. But the upshot is that now I save this, a user would go to that front panel you've already seen. They would type in their Active Directory credentials. Morpheus would then ask, is this user authenticated? Are they allowed to access Morpheus, which would be controlled by a group? And if so, what groups they should be a member of? And that then gives us the Morpheus roles they're allowed to use. And that's it. It's that easy to integrate Active Directory, and now we can start using it. And if then that tool already has other services like multi-factor authentication enabled, the user will be passed through that process before they're allowed to access Morpheus. I say, the reason I just want to spend a bit of time on that was the fact it's a great example of a codeless integration. And I will talk about a few more of those as we go through. But now, once we've got our users with a method to authenticate, what we're going to do is we're actually going to have a look at, well, what can a user do once they're in Morpheus? And to do that, I'm actually going to pick on a user here, and I'm going to show you, actually this is a really nice help desk feature actually if you're supporting users who are using Morpheus. Sometimes it's hard to work out exactly what a user should be able to do. Many systems have identity access management tools and roles and groups and all those sorts of things, and there's lots of different ways that it can be confusing to try and work out exactly what somebody can do. And Morpheus is similar. A user could be a member of one role, which would be very easy to know whether they should be able to do something. They can be a member of multiple roles, in which case we create a virtual role for them, if you like. So to help our users, one of the things we added was the ability to say, well, okay, well, here's Dinesh. He's having a problem. He's rung up the help desk, said, I'm trying to do something. And so we said, okay, well, let's give you a view of what his role enables him to do. So we're not editing the role here. We're actually looking at the filtered view of his role. This is what he should be able to do. Now, what I want you to notice on the right-hand side, most of this is set to none. Dinesh is a developer. I don't want him doing a lot of things on the system, and you'll see this in action in a moment. But what I also need to look at is on the left-hand side is the sorts of things that could be set by the role. So showing two things here really is the granularity of our role control, but also the breadth of things that you can do in Morpheus. And in this session, this is the closest I'm going to get really to a sort of a feature listing for you. But yeah, administration, setting up things like distributed workers, which are the ability to have remote functions of Morpheus inside secure areas and connecting back to a centralized Morpheus server to provide a very capable extension of Morpheus through the ability to do integrations, through setting up message of the day, through things like white labeling, which you'll see in action in a moment, where we can rebrand the product, down through things like setting up backups, catalog items, infrastructure. You'll see there's quite a lot of here in infrastructure. That is connection to the cloud, creating Kubernetes clusters, managing networks, etc., and all of those capabilities. into the library section, which again you'll see in action. I'm not going to go into the library function today, but it's a very important part of Morpheus, how I can make services available to my customers through a marketplace, and what I can do in there. And there's a lot of different things you can see here that we can set and change. And then through our operations section, where we're going the other side, we're going to look at not so much the building of workloads, but what have we got running? How much is it costing me? Can I improve my efficiencies? Can I save money? Those types of things. Into provisioning, which is where we're going to spend most of this session today, looking at how I can build workloads, what I can do with them, that type of thing, through to finally sort of things like the ability to use our Cipher server. We have a built-in key value store, which is very important when you're building multi-tier applications and applications you want people to connect to without having to exchange credentials, and things like Kubernetes. So let's say this isn't a role, it's really just my ability to show you some of the range of things that you can do in Morpheus, and then the granularity of control, what we can turn off and turn on. And you'll see that Dinesh on the right hand side has a lot of this turned off. The other thing I just want to show you at this point as well is I mentioned the library. That's where we can create what we call instances, which are then the services that users can provision. And I think of them as building blocks. I think of them as a bit like Legos, where I have red blocks, blue blocks, green blocks, and these are the things that I want to use. And I might use one on its own, an operating system, for example. You can see there a CentOS box, or a Windows server, or a SUSE Linux server, for example. But more likely, in modern sort of application development, you're going to want to have services, things like a web server, a database server, a message queue. And these are all the sorts of things that you can build in Morpheus, and they are you can build these on all of the clouds that Morpheus supports, and we support things like templates and marketplace items, scripting, integrating with things like Terraform, Ansible, etc., to build up, and all of these things we use together to build instance type, and then they're put into the marketplace. The reason I want to show you this is just the breadth of things that you can do. Customers often ask, are you only open source tools? Or no, we're not. We're anything that can be built on a cloud. So be it a Windows server, be it a PaaS service, be it a containerized element, can all be added into our library. But again, I don't want my users to have absolutely access to absolutely everything. So this is our demo lab. Lots of things get built and thrown in here, but I just want Dinesh to focus on his job. And again, on the right-hand side, you'll see that a lot of this is turned off. And so the reason I wanted to show you this is in a moment, you're going to see the marketplace, and it's going to be a limited list. I didn't want you to think, is that all you can do? Okay, enough about this. This capability. What I want to do is get in and show you this in action. So I'm going to use another really nice feature of Morpheus, which is because I've got the role, I'm at this master tenant level, and I can use a function called Impersonate. What this allows me to do is log in as Dinesh without needing his credentials, which is obviously very important. I don't need to get him to send me his password, or I don't need to reset his password or anything like that. I'm now logged in as him. That is audited, of course, then there's security. That is audited, and anything I do will be in our audit database saying, James Smith acting as Dinesh did this or that. But the important thing is what I can do is I can see exactly what this guy can do. So if he's having a problem or he's seeing something odd, I can see exactly that. But for our demo, really useful because I can now act as a new user with a whole new role. And first things obvious, I mentioned white labeling. You can see that the branding has changed, color schemes, logos, etc. Morpheus allows you to set this white label. You can do it actually at the master tenant level and push it down into all your subtenants, or you can actually have a different white labeling scheme for each of your subtenants if you wanted to as well. So really your choice. We're not precious about our branding. You can remove the Morpheus branding completely. And set all of these things, including things like where does the customer go if they hit the support link, for example, at the top. The other thing you'll notice now is that the menu has changed. Remember, I was showing you the role. Dinesh had no administrative capabilities, for example, so we remove the menu. We don't grey it out. We don't tempt Dinesh with, there are functions you can't use, in the system. We just remove them. He has no idea that there's an administrative capability. What we're going to do, we're actually just going to say this is really a day in the life. This is Dinesh. He's logged in the morning and he needs to do his job. So the first thing is he can come in here and he can see a set of workloads. What are these? Well, these are these instances I was talking about. These are these building blocks, these application building blocks. And we're looking at the instance view here. One thing to notice is that in this view, he's actually seeing workloads that are running on a number of clouds. We've got services that are running on Azure. We've got services running on AWS. We've got services running on Nutanix. And in a moment, I'm going to build something and we'll do it on VMware, for example. So in this one view, Dinesh has access to multiple workloads running on multiple clouds. This view is very controlled. It's controlled by the tenancy he's in. It's then also further controlled by the group that he's in. So inside this tenancy, there's a group called Dev Team, and the clouds that he's allowed to use are in that group. But that cloud can be in multiple groups, and he will only see the workloads that are provisioned through the group that he's a member of. So for example, I know there's another user in this system that is a member of a group called Production, where there are other workloads running on exactly the same clouds, but Dinesh can't see those. But the guy with Production can see his workloads are running in Production, and actually his role gives him membership of Group Dev Team as well, so he sees Dinesh's workload, so he gets a bigger view of the system. And in fact, taking this a stage further, all of these clouds in our demo lab are also shared by multiple tenants, including the master tenant, and there are lots of workloads running across all of these services. But again, Dinesh is very limited on what he can see. Now, this view is important. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. But before I do, I just want to build a new workload. So Dinesh has been given a new project and he just needs to write a new web app. And so he wants to spin up a new web server. And he clicks on Add, and he now gets a marketplace. He gets a list of things that he's allowed to use. So you can see here there's things like Apache, CentOS, MySQL, SQL Server, and Windows servers as well. So these are what have been approved for him to use within his working environment. He can't go off to a cloud and provision some obscure service that's just come out on Amazon because it's the latest and greatest way to develop a web app. He uses the company standard tools. Now in our case, say he's going to build a new website, and so he needs to use Apache. So he selects that. Now you'll notice I'm not picking a cloud at this point. I'm picking the service I need. What happens next is we go through and now Morpheus starts filtering where this can run. So a couple of things go on. First of all, we look at what groups Dinesh is a member of. He's a member of only Group Dev Team. We then look at, okay, in that Group Dev Team, what clouds are there? And there will be a number of clouds inside that group, potentially. And the final filter is, okay, these are the clouds that I've got allocated. Which clouds do I know how to build Apache onto? At that point, we then get a filtered list of clouds that meet those criteria that Dinesh has access to, and we know how to build Apache onto. In this case, we get 4 clouds split between 2 public clouds and 2 private clouds. Maybe Pied Piper are on a journey. They are currently using VMware maybe extensively, but they're looking at maybe starting to use Nutanix. But also they're on a journey to public cloud, or they just need some extra resource just to give developers some capacity to build and test things out on public cloud, but they won't put anything in production there. Whatever. The idea is that here the user has the ability to do this build of this server onto these 4 clouds. Okay, I'm going to just click on AWS to start with. And what we're actually going to do is we'll build this on VMware because we haven't got a VMware service running at the moment. I just want to spin one up, so we've got that in our lab as well. So we're going to start with AWS. And the thing to note here is that there's a box that is grayed out and I can't change and is full of a string of something. Well, what this is actually is showing off another capability of Morpheus. This is a policy. This is a Morpheus policy in action. So as well as our roles, our groups, our tenancy, all this control about where and what people can do, and so on and so forth. We also have a policy engine where you can set holistic guides. So in this case, we're setting the name of this instance, this VM. So as we build this machine, it's going to be given a name. Dinesh can't name it after, his favorite car, or Dinesh test, which is, I would always call everything James test if I was given the chance, and then I forget why I called it that. Here it's going to be named per the company rules and regulations. And if you look at it, it's just a piece of variables and string manipulation, and actually it's going to use the user's initials, group code, cloud code. These are all variables inside Morpheus. You can also create new variables and use those if you want to, and also sequence numbers. I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to go through, and I'm going to now go into another form. And I'll just mention what I'm showing you here is, I refer to it as Morpheus Classic. This is the way we originally designed Morpheus to be used, and it's really the simplest form that you can give somebody, asking them all the questions that we need to know to build a resource on a new cloud. So, we're going to need to know how big the machine is, how much memory, how much disk, how many CPUs, what network, what security groups, those sorts of things. There's a minimum that we need to know, and we're giving the user access to that minimum, and we can populate other things around the outside of that. So I refer to it as Morpheus Classic. It's always been the way that we've done it. It's always been the way that it's been used, and I've been here 6 years using this. You can't change this form much. You can actually add to it very easily. I mentioned you could add variables, and so you can add variables into Morpheus, and you can then ask the customer, your user, to fill in those variables. Maybe you want a username or a password for a database, or you want a support level group, and you want some tags on there. So you can add items to this form, but you can't take anything off it. You can default things, but this is the minimum you can get away with. And over time, we've spoken to customers about, could we simplify this further? Could I answer some of these questions? I don't want the customer to know which network it's going on. I'm going to make that choice for them. And what I'll do is I'll show you, yes, you can. Now we have that capability, and we refer to it as cataloging. Of course, the other question I get is, well, I've got customers who need to be able to do more than that. And in fact, I just don't want to build a single machine, that they want to build an application stack. And again, what I'll show you in a few minutes is we can take this core functionality, our library items, and actually build blueprints, which are then multi-tier applications, and we can start doing more complex capability. But like I say, this is my Morpheus Classic way of doing it. So what am I doing? Well, I'm picking those items that I needed, that I mentioned. So I need to give the machine a size. Well, on public clouds, there's this concept of plans. You pick a plan. So what Morpheus does is, you connect us to a public cloud, we'll go and get those plans and bring them in, and then make those available for the user to pick. So he can go through and say, yep, I want a T2 medium. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that we actually bring the cost of that plan through. And this is a great feature of Morpheus. This is where we really start to give you the concept of cost management and cloud cost management and managing spend, etc. We don't just look at this after the event and go, oh, you're spending this amount. You need to start looking at different teams and asking them why they're spending this money. What we can do is up front is we can start showing users costs. So here, this is going to cost $45 a month. Do we need to spend that? Just be aware of that. But also I could say, well, you've got other places where you could build this. Could you do this somewhere cheaper? And what Morpheus has done at this point is it's gone and it looked at, okay, what clouds could Dinesh do this on in this particular configuration? Have we got somewhere we could run this cheaper? And oh yeah, VMware, you could do this on the VMware cloud, and it's going to cost you $22. So I can do a cloud comparison at this point. But also what we can do, remember I mentioned the policy engine. If Dinesh tries to do something a little bit crazy here, now I've given this guy access to all the plans. That can be limited, of course, but Dinesh goes a little bit crazy. He's been given access to all of this, so he builds a 96 core, 384 gig memory machine for his demo usage, and he sets it all up and he hits next. We can get hit with a policy. Again, remember that policy engine, we can set things like limits. So here we've exceeded a memory limit. You might have set a memory limit for the user. You do policies right down to a user, but it could also be more likely at a cloud level or a group level or at a tenant level. So we might be saying, okay, all of the machines running across the whole of this tenancy can only use up to 200 gigabytes of memory, regardless of clouds, for example. But also more useful, I think, is things like you could set a budget. So that machine's going to cost $3,700 a month. Maybe the project for the budget for the project is only $5,000 a month, so that might well take it above the limits. But as you can see, very simple form to fill in. The other thing to know is the administrator. That's a combination of both the tenant, the master tenant administrator, perhaps sharing services down, but also the administrator inside this tenancy is limiting the services that where the service can be built, including things like security groups. A number of times that I've worked with POCs where they build a new machine for us to install Morpheus on, and they want to do it on Amazon because it's the easiest place for them to set up a test server. But I'll just do ingress rule 000/0, all ports open, because they don't want to work through what do I need to set up. So the ability to create your own security groups can be very dangerous. So limiting here, Dinesh can only use this security group because we only want him to have SSH access to the machine. We don't want him opening up any other ports. If he does, we can add those security groups. Maybe he wants to get port 80 access or 443 access to check his app. We can do that and give him that security group. Okay, as I promised, I actually want to do this on VMware. So I'm just going to swap over to VMware, and you'll see that things like the name stays the same because we're using the same policy across the clouds. And I go through, but something actually changes. Very subtle. The form is slightly different, and if you look at it, it's actually offering me a container. Now, I never asked for a container at any point, and I wasn't offered a container when I went to Amazon. Why? Well, two reasons. One is we have a container image in our library, so Morpheus knows how to build and manage Kubernetes and Docker-based applications. And we've got a link in our library behind the Apache library item. We've got a link to a Docker image. So it's available, but it wasn't presented on AWS because there's no Kubernetes cluster or Docker cluster available to this user on that cloud. However, on VMware, there is. We actually have a Kubernetes cluster running on VMware. It's actually a Morpheus Kubernetes cluster, an MKS cluster. We have a built-in build and manage of Kubernetes clusters in Morpheus. We won't get into that today, but I'd just like to mention it because it's a very important capability. So we can build and manage Kubernetes clusters in Morpheus, and then I've made a resource pool available to this subtenant. So Morpheus has done that filtering again. It said, okay, you want to do this on VMware? Oh, I see you've got a Kubernetes cluster. Would you like to deploy this as a container? Now I don't. What I want to do is actually want to deploy it as a VM. So now with that change of layout, I've actually changed infrastructure types. And now I'm looking at VMware. Just like Amazon, I'm now going to pick from a range of plans. And you can see here, somebody's been playing around with some creating new plans. We ship with some default ones to show you the sort of concepts, but people get very creative with these. They might start to name them similar to Amazon ones, or they might name them like small, medium, large. It's entirely up to you. You can create your own plans. And the other thing you can do is create your own costs. What I didn't mention earlier is the Amazon costs are coming from Amazon, and they'll come from Azure, and they'll come from Google. And what we do is once you've set Morpheus up and you've connected us to those clouds, we'll go and get those costs from the cloud via your account. So we'll get your account costs every 24 hours. So they're 24 hours up to date. And they are just estimated costs. We can't at this point show you the cost of data ingress, data egress, that type of thing. So it's just an estimated cost, but it's a good indication of the sorts of costs you'll incur by running these machines. And for VMware and the other private clouds, what we allow you to do is build your own plans. OpenStack will bring through flavors, but for Nutanix and VMware and so on, you can build plans in Morpheus, and then you can cost up things like the CPU, the disk, the memory, etc. In our price list engine, and therefore present a cost to the user. We'll then track that through the life of the machine, and you can then report on that, use it for analytics and those sorts of things. hopefully I'll have a few minutes at the end of the demo to show you that capability. Just like in Amazon, I'm now going to be picking like a resource pool. I'm picking a storage, how much storage I want. I pick my network. Now, this is actually a vCenter cloud, and we're connected at the master tenant level. And what the master tenant has done there is he said, okay, I have some subtenants, Pied Piper, you can use this network. So this network has been allocated to Pied Piper, and this is the only network I have available to me from that environment. And then over here, I'm getting an IP address. Now we're actually going to allocate a fixed IP address to this machine, and that's going to come from an IP pool. So this is another example of either where we can do something automatically inside Morpheus. We actually have a built-in IP pool management tool. If you don't have one yourself, it's really nice to use fixed IPs when you're doing self-service like this. But if you already have something like PHP IPAM or BlueCat or InfoBlocks or Efficient IP, we have integrations with those. You connect Morpheus to those, and you can say, okay, use this pool on this network. And Morpheus, just like that AD integration I showed you, is Morpheus will then interact with that. You'll get the range of pools, it'll get the pool IPs, it'll request an IP, and then update the IP pool management tool with the new host name, the IP addresses in use, etc. And when the machine is deleted, it will then release the record back. So we fill in our form, we then hit next. And you'll notice I'm not going through every single menu, too much to show you. I just wanted to show you the core capability here. You know, we can do further demos with you, or if you're testing the product out, you can try a lot of these capabilities yourself, of course. But I did want to show you this. This is it's called the automation panel. And this is actually the reason I picked the Apache server for the demos. Just this panel is a bit more feature rich than, say, if this was just an operating system. If it's an operating system, I wouldn't have a reason, for example, to do a deployment. Because it's a web server, I might want to deploy a new build of my web app. You know, remember I'm doing some web development, so I just want to see what the latest version of the web app is like. So I've uploaded my file to Morpheus, to my deployment server, and now I can grab the latest version and push that down onto this server as I build it. I can also tag it into a load balancer, another example of an integration point. In our demo lab, we have an F5 integrated. Again, we have a wide range of load balancers available. But again, the administrator has connected it. They've said, yep, okay, you can use load balancers. And what I can do as a user now is I can fill in my details of what I want from this load balancer. So I need to have a little bit of knowledge here. Maybe if your user isn't aware of this type of functionality, you might remove this, but I can fill in the detail, and now as this service builds, it will go and create that VIP record for me and make that available to me. Likewise, I can have I can back this machine up. Morpheus again has built-in backup, which is snapshotting in the main, but for private infrastructure, things like VMware, we have integrations with things like Veeam, Commvault, Avamar. I'll also mention at this point, it's a good point to talk about our integrations, because as you see, we have a lot of integration. I keep talking about these integrations we have, and those of you who've been around a long time know that is complex. Us maintaining those integrations is complex. It's a lot of work, and actually adding new integrations is, we have to write it into the core product, or we used to have to do that. Something that Morpheus has done over the last couple of years is actually re-architect our own product. And under the covers now, each of these places where I talk about integration has become a place where we can have a plugin. And so we're creating a place where you can drop code into Morpheus that gives you the functionality. So an example is we're currently working on the backup plugin area. And in the future, you'll be able to go to our development toolkit, grab our backup plugin generator, and you could then write your own integration with a backup tool that we don't currently support. For example, Net Backup. You would need to know the API calls, which we'll give you guidance on, but there would be a few API calls that you'll need to know. You would put those into the plugin, save that plugin, compile it, and then you would be able to load that into your own Morpheus server and have your own backup integration for a tool that Morpheus doesn't natively support. Very important part of the product for us. It's going to allow us to be a lot more flexible in the way we support core integrations that we're going to identify and keep supporting, things like Veeam. It's going to be all of the areas, so the clouds, the backup, the load balancers, the ITSM tools, the DNS servers, all of those sorts of things that we integrate with today will become this plugin architecture. And like I say, it really has helped us become a framework and a very extensible tool that can be used across your enterprise. I'm going to set a backup for the moment. Likewise, replication, you might have, we support Zerto currently as our replication target. It hasn't been allocated properly to our tenancy there. So you can see there's a live demo. It's not set there, so I don't need to worry about that. And the final thing I'm just going to show you here is life cycling. This is really good if you're giving self-service to developers and maybe prod test people, that type of thing, where often things get spun up and because it's so easy to do, they get forgotten about, somebody gets distracted, they go off on a different project, forget about the machine. So what Morpheus you can do is you can set, again, policies around how long these machines can run for. Now, in our demo lab, this is a bit strong. It's a one-day policy, but it means, for example, when I logged in this morning, there was a nice selection of VMs that are running because I've set a lifetime policy on those. They've been set to be run forever if I want to. But if I provision a standard machine into the demo lab, it will automatically get shut down, it'll be powered down permanently after 24 hours. And actually our policy is that it'll also be deleted that same day. So that could be a 30-day shutdown policy, and then maybe a 60-day expiry. So if the machine gets powered down after 30 days and then nobody complains, after 60 days it gets deleted. People get sent emails. The owner of the machine will be sent an email. There'll also be a visual representation of the policy in the instance. You'll see that in a moment. And I can extend it. We're not just going to delete it. It can be extended. And another nice one, particularly useful if you're looking at reducing costs on public cloud, or maybe looking at power usage in your own data centers, you can actually power machines down when you know they may not be used. So again, you see we've got a scheduled dev team that actually will power machines down between 8 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock in the morning. If that's on a public cloud, you might be able to save yourself 40% of your costs, for example, because you're not using any CPU or memory during that period, so you won't be charged for it. Okay, spent a lot of time talking through this, but it's important because it gives me the ability to talk about the different areas that we integrate with, how our processes work, and it's really the heart of Morpheus, this piece. But I'm finally there. I've got my summary. You can see the machine has now been named based on the policy that was set, and this is number 430 of this particular combination of sequences. And I'm going to hit complete, and that's going to go away and start to build that machine. And you can see down here it's starting to launch. We'll come and have a look at that in a moment. Like I said, I did promise you I'm going to come back to this, but before we do, I just want to show you a couple of options around how you can then build on that. And one is to build on it and then make it simpler, and that's using our catalog capability. Internally, we refer to this as the easy button because it makes provisioning easy. Not that I think that last way was particularly hard, but to give you an example, and this is a bit of an extreme example, if I came into the catalog and wanted an Apache server, my administrator could have made it a single question form. And in fact, you can take all the questions away if you want. You can just offer these catalog items and have nothing on here. But this is a configurable form. You can add whatever fields you want on here, and you can create whatever types of variables and inputs you want. And if you think about this is going to actually do a couple of things. It's going to create, in effect, a payload file that will be passed to that instance build. So it's going to have all of the configuration items that I selected, the network, the plan, the resource pool that I want to use, etc., etc., are all in the payload file, and I can create and edit that in Morpheus. And then I can request inputs from the user that can manipulate the values or just add additional information into the instance as I build it. For example, here, somebody's created this one, and all they ask for is what's your cost center. So that might just tag the machine with a cost center tag and engineering, or it might actually change which network this machine gets built on, or it might change the life cycle, the machine is given. So it might not be deleted after 30 days, it might be deleted after 60 days, for example. So these variables allow you to manipulate the build of this machine and really create a form that asks the questions that you want to ask. Maybe they're going to be more business orientated and allow you to make then the technical decisions based on the business need. Is it a production server? How many users need to access it concurrently? So on and so forth. And what Morpheus has done is we realized this was very useful, and we also realized we had a number of other things going on. So when I built that machine, when I clicked on build for that machine, I could attach behind the scenes in the library, there's a way of attaching scripts to a lot of stages of the life of that machine. And those scripts could be bash scripts, they could be Groovy scripts, they could be Ansible playbooks, and I could run those throughout the build of the machine, through the life of the machine as it's powered off, powered on, even all the way through to deletion. So Morpheus has that capability. Also remember that there are the integration points going on. So just while I remember, for example, as that machine gets built, I know that that goes and updates ServiceNow because we've got an integration with ServiceNow, and the cloud that I've built that into has been tagged to yes, make sure that you keep our ServiceNow CMDB up to date. But going back to our catalog, what I have here is I have a way of running scripts, I have a way of creating forms and handling inputs. So at that point, I can sort of start to experiment or go off in other directions. So for example, here I've got a catalog item and it's create an AD user. So it's nothing to do with building a new service, it's manipulating an existing service in this case. So I can give a user access to this catalog item because of their role. So maybe they're my junior op guy in operations team, and he just gets emails saying, yep, new starter, can you add this user? And rather than him log into Active Directory and start to manipulate it, we've just given him a form. You can fill in, click order now, and Morpheus will go away. And in this case, it will actually take all the variables and pass them to a PowerShell script and run them on an authenticated server, which actually then uses credentials from our built-in Cypher server to connect to the AD server securely and add that user. And I can then give the user an output that says, yes, this user has been created. So we refer to those as operational workflows, and this is a nice example, but you think about things that you could do. This could be manipulating your ACI switches using Ansible playbooks. It could be going off and creating new circuits or setting up things that Morpheus doesn't natively support, things like VPNs and stuff like that. As long as you can write the scripts to do it and you have variables that you want to pass to it, you could create those as operational workflows. And we can then take that a step further, and we added and again, this was working with a customer. They said, well, we like that feature, and that gives us the ability to go and do things, but we have no representation then of that in Morpheus because it's just a workflow that we run and it's done and it's finished. But we maybe want to build something that Morpheus doesn't understand, which we can do with a workflow, but we want to have a presentation of it in Morpheus and actually see it and maybe even post interact with it. So we added a capability called X as a service, which just takes that workflow concept and allows you to do a very similar thing. But if I ran this, it would actually create a Morpheus instance, which we're going to go back and look at the instance list in a minute. And this would present, in this case, it would present a Dropbox as an instance type in Morpheus. And again, you're now not limited to what types of services you can build through Morpheus and present in Morpheus. You have this X as a service capability. The final thing I'm going to show you, I did mention about going the other way. So if you like, that's going to the easy side of the street. That's becoming the easiest way for users to use Morpheus. And like I say, this has really come about because as customers embrace Morpheus and the way it works, they realize that more people can use it, but maybe they're just not quite as used to IT as maybe the ops guys, and they want to make it as simple as possible, limit the questions. So that's great. But then you might have the guys that want to do more advanced things. And so we have a full blueprinting capability in Morpheus as well. This is for you to build out multi-tier applications, multi-infrastructure components, that type of thing. I'm showing you here the Morpheus blueprint editor. We have our own blueprinting language, our own DSL. And we like it. I know I like it because it's very powerful. It's very easy to use. I can build multi-tier applications very easily because I'm adding things from my catalog. So maybe I want to add a new app tier in here, and that app tier is going to be my Tomcat server. I want to add a new so I can very quickly and easily add to this, and I can start configuring this, going, well, actually, yeah, my app tier connects to my web and my database. But now I want the web tier, so I can start telling each component how they talk to each other. I can even put things like boot ordering in, so I know I want my database to come up first. I'd probably like the app tier to come up, boot order 1, and then after all that's available, then I'd probably like this to go to boot order 2. And then the other thing I can do is then start configuring the components on the clouds. And you'll see here, this is a very powerful capability of Morpheus DSL, is I can build this app and configure it for multiple clouds. Now, it's not going to mean it's going to deploy it across multiple clouds. What it's going to do is allow me to have the same blueprint and at provision time choose which cloud it goes on to and have a standardized blueprint across the different clouds. So if I'm in that journey from one cloud to another, we're not going to migrate the applications as such, but we can help the customers develop the new application stack on the new cloud by having a standardized blueprint for them. And like a lot of templating, I can come in and I can go through, and as the developer of the blueprint, I can set my rules. You'll recognize this form. It's what network I want it to run on, how big I want the machine to be, and if I don't want the user to change those, I can lock those all down. So at deployment time, these are fixed. The user can't change them at provisioning time. And just to quickly show you the difference, if I actually provision that, the way a user would use that is through the apps capability. And what I can do is I can add an app, and I'm going to use this Pied Piper one here. I select it and I give it a name. So I'm going to call it Demo Test 123. I'm going to put it in my dev team group, and I'm going to do this one on AWS. And I hit next. Morpheus will go and pull up the relevant section of the blueprint. I could click on these and it would show me the configuration, but I don't need to worry about that. What's actually more important is at this point, as I hit next, it does a template validation and it says, have I got all the information I need? Is there anything that I need to get from the user? Because I might have left some form fields blank. And if that had been the case, Morpheus has said, okay, you need to fill in these items. So there might be things I want the user to configure at runtime. But in this case, there's nothing. Remember, we're auto-naming the machines, so we don't even have to do naming or anything like that. And I hit complete, and that will now go away, and that will start to build that. And that will build 2 instances and combine them together, and actually does quite a lot more. It then loads a version of the app. It actually puts some in the database as well, and there's a bunch of other stuff going on, but that's building of an app stack in Morpheus. Okay, we're now going to have a quick look at the, I refer to it as the day 2 operations, and I think that's a good description. So you'll see here now, in fact, the list has grown somewhat. I noticed that I've got a colleague who's probably doing a demo at the same time. He's built a couple of machines since we've been talking. You can see there's a couple of machines currently building. They're the 2 from the app, and you can see here there's a little field that says app, and there you see demo test 123, so we can see those in here, as well as I can see those combined into the app, and I'll show you that. But more importantly, what I can do is I can click on this machine here. Do you remember that 430, the one we built? It's now up, it's running, it's healthy, and so if I click on it, we can go and have a look and see what's going on. Now, there's a lot of information in here, and it's really useful information. So we can see things like, when it was built, we can see the name of it, we can see the plan it's running, we can see the expiry. You see it's got the expiry rules here. Now they've popped up because there's a rule that says within 24 hours, put a banner up. But maybe this is, maybe it's got another 6 weeks to run, but I want to know if it's going to be shut down and when it's going to expire, but I wouldn't get this banner. And as you can see, I could extend the life of this machine now, and it'll go and trigger a workflow to extend it. And in fact, sort of the part of the approval process, I just mentioned that's another really nice policy capability. As I build machines, I could have a policy as well, before you actually get the final okay to build it, it needs to go through an approval. and Morpheus can do that itself, built-in approvals, and we do approvals at build, reconfigure, and delete. You can have approval processes triggered, and that can be internal, or it can go and trigger into an ITSM tool. Good example again is ServiceNow. We can trigger a ServiceNow approval workflow to say, is the user allowed to have this machine? Lots of detail about the machine, as I mentioned. There's the F5 load balancer information. Now I can't actually click on that because I'm not on the VPN. My recording session gets very slow if I go on the VPN. But if I clicked on that, it would take me through to the website. But you can see the load balancer record is there and ready for me to use. And then down here, I can see data about this machine. I'm getting performance data. Now this is coming from inside the machine. How are we doing that? Well, we actually installed an agent into that machine. So Morpheus does have an agent capability. It's not mandatory. It's something you can choose to use or not, but it has a lot of benefits. One of which is, doesn't matter what cloud this machine is running on, I can get performance data from inside it. The agent actually gets installed, as I say, as we built the server, so you don't have to bake it into any images, and we can install onto pretty much any operating system. And then it communicates back to the Morpheus server on port 443. So it's a secure communication method, and it will start sending back this payload with performance data from inside the machine, and it will give me up to a 24-hour window here of visibility on the data. I'll also get log files from inside the machine. It hasn't started populating yet, but the log file for the application will come through as well into here, so I don't have to log into the machine to look at log files, perhaps if I'm having an application error log, that type of thing. And the agent does a few other things as well, as information in our documentation about this, but it'll do things like you can run Ansible playbooks over it. So you can run Ansible playbooks over port 443 for security, which is really, really useful. It'll also do things like give you a list of all the software versions installed on a machine. So for example, if you wanted to do a vulnerability scan or something like that, really useful. Another nice capability, as well as being able to see all of this sort of thing, is I can actually connect to this machine through Morpheus. And I actually get two methods. I can do guest, which will be an SSH connection to that machine. See here, it's done that. But the other one for private clouds, which is really useful, is I can also, if I'm been given the role and it's been configured on the cloud, I can actually get a hypervisor console access. So if this machine is sitting away on a network that isn't generally connected, or perhaps it's maybe it's a Windows 7, I've forgotten to turn on the remote desktop connection option, then I could get a console access, log in, make that change, and be able to then use it through standard remote desktop if I wanted to, which again Morpheus supports. But hypervisor console is really useful for support methods. And then finally in this section, we just have the ability to do things on this server. And remember, this is pretty much cloud agnostic. It isn't because it's running on VMware, its console is, but other than that, pretty much everything else is. It's because it's a Morpheus instance. So I can do things, I can stop and start this, I can stop and start the service because there's a web service running, or I can stop and start the server itself. I can do things like reconfigure. So maybe from the performance data, maybe this machine was too small and I need to have more memory or more CPU, so I could make the change. Again, if I'm allowed to, this is a role that I've been given. I can add more storage, change the networking, etc. All within the same parameters as I had when I built the machine initially. And then I can do things like run scripts, task workflows, which maybe have been made available to me. So I could, for example, run a task here. There's a few tasks been made available, and there's one here. Yep, here's my Pied Piper standard. Now, in the name, we've actually said that it's Ansible, but me as a user, I don't know that. I don't need to know that it's an Ansible playbook. I've just been told, here's a task, run it. It will do X for you. Maybe it updates the packages or something for me, or installs a toolkit that I want. And what I can do is that's run, and I'll get a history of that in Morpheus, and I can say, yep, that's run. And because it's Ansible, there's a bunch of other things that we do actually behind the scenes as well from regards to Ansible integration. You can see that around that playbook without me ever knowing actually what that's about, but it's performed the function on the machine. And just to finish off, what I'll show you here is, remember I provisioned that app. The difference is that yes, the instances appear and I can view them as individual instances, but I can also view it as an application stack. So here I can see the Pied Piper app. This performance data is actually an aggregate of the two services, both the web server and the database server running. If I look at the instances, I can see the separate instances and I can go into those individually. But if I, for example, look at the log files here, I'll be getting log files from both the Apache server and the database server. So again, it's in effect an application log, all the way through to an ability to monitor. And this will start populating shortly, but I won't talk about this too much today. But as we build services like a web server, like a database server, Morpheus can automatically create a monitor for that, which is a way of going and checking, is the service that I've created actually available? So it's not checking the machine, it's saying, you've created a website, can I reach that website? And so we're going and checking that there's a HTTP request response every 5 minutes. And if so, it then gives me that information and presents that as a performance chart. And again, if I've built an app stack, it will actually combine those together to give me, is the application available? Is the web server available? Is the database server available? It won't actually check the connection between the two, but it will say, yes, in theory, the app should be available. Okay, spoken a lot. I've gone through a lot of stuff in a lot of detail, but I really wanted to spend quite a bit of time on this core functionality and this core capability, and really everything else that Morpheus does hangs off this. So the ability to go and integrate with all those different services, is typically required to build machines. So can I go and update my CMDB? Can I get a load balancer record? Am I integrated to a cloud, etc.? And then you're pulling all of those pieces together to create a seamless process of building a machine and making sure all the correct things are done at the right time. Our library function allows you to build very feature-rich applications, instances, and then application stacks, and present those to your users in a very simple to use marketplace or through a catalog item, and then have prices attached to those. So as we're building them, we can see costs for doing that, and also later on report on the costs and the usage, etc. So it's very important to understand this core capability. But to finish off, and I've been going quite a while now, as I say, I just want to finish off with, I'm just going to drop back to the top level, and I'm just going to run through a couple of things here. I think it's just worth understanding, and this is, as you get to understand Morpheus and know about it, you'll see more and more things. But you'll see, for example, integration. So I have the ability to create integrations with a wide range of tools. We've talked about this at length, the plugin architecture, there's codeless integrations. But just to give you an example of the things that we currently can do, we can be integrated with a wide range of automation tools, for example. Ansible is probably our most popular now. So if you've already got Ansible playbooks, we can use those, reuse those, use those as part of the Morpheus process. Do you need to create a DNS record for a machine as you build it, then integrate it with your DNS server? Do you want to store your scripts and other items in a Git repository? We can go and do that. Maybe you want to use Terraform through Morpheus, which we absolutely support. So you might want to install your Terraform in Git or your Ansible in Git, for example, all the way through to integrating things like ServiceNow. And I just click on this one just because ServiceNow is such a beast, such a big thing, so complicated, but used by an awful lot of large enterprises and MSPs for very good reasons. Just to show you, to get Morpheus connected to it, give us the address of your ServiceNow host, give us credentials, and you can start using it. We'll start mapping to the CI for the CMDB, but you can also then start custom mapping values as well in here. And what I didn't mention is we also have a ServiceNow plugin which you can start publishing. Do you remember those catalog items I showed you? I could build the Apache server or the AD group or whatever. I can actually publish those straight into ServiceNow. So again, a true codeless integration. I can give the user the ability to build services from ServiceNow through Morpheus without writing any code. A couple other things. I'll just show you clouds. I think this is a very important one. It's our primary integration, if you like. So I'm going to actually look at it through groups. Now, you'll notice there's no group dev team here. That's because we're not in that tenant anymore. We're in the master tenant. that group doesn't exist here. I have a group called Demo, and you can see there are 20 clouds configured into this group. And here's all the clouds that are currently configured. Again, I'll just point out, we're acting as a broker here to those clouds. I, as a user, have no log on to any of these clouds. I have no access to any of these clouds. I'm not going to be doing anything on these clouds as me. It's all done through the service connection. But just to show you, here's a complete list of Morpheus clouds that we currently support. On the public side, you can see we have Amazon, Azure, Google. They're the big three that we really are used by. But we do see Huawei and variations of it. It's an OpenStack based cloud, and a number of organizations OEM it out into the public cloud. So we have an integration with that. And then on the private side, we have a number of tools, including the Microsoft things like Azure Stack, Hyper-V, SCVMM, through Nutanix, through OpenStack, through to, again, our most popular cloud is VMware for our enterprises, but we're seeing a lot of Nutanix. We see a reasonable amount of OpenStack still, but also for the MSPs, we see vCloud Director. So, wide range of clouds, again, very similar, just to show you, codeless integration. If I want to add a VMware cloud, simply click on it. I want to create a new entry. This top section is Morpheus metadata. We're going to give it a name. We're going to tell Morpheus some things about the cloud. But the important thing is I then say, yep, here's my vCenter. Here's my credentials to connect to it. And at that point, you could start using the cloud. But just to show you some things I haven't really touched on today is we can go and look at what's already running. If you connect us to a cloud, we could go and have a look at what's already running on there. So that's called inventory existing instances. And we can do that on all clouds that we support. And we can bring you in a list of all the VMs, the services that are running on those public clouds, those EC2 instances, those Azure VMs, etc. And bring those in and give you visibility of those in an administrative area, and if you want to, you can then publish those to your users, again using groups and roles, etc. So really nice capability. And just to show you, once you have a cloud connected, again, we've been focused very much at the user level of Morpheus until now. I just want to show you some of this administrative stuff, infrastructure and all of these things are really administrative capabilities or infrastructure host type understanding. I'm just going to click on VMware here. This is my vCenter. Morpheus isn't replacing the vCenter, but it gives you lots of capability. We're immediately costing this cloud. Remember, we've got plans, we've got VMs, we're keeping track of the usage so we can see how much we're spending. So this month, of course, it's very early in the month, it's just the beginning of August. We're up to $383 spent this month. But we're probably trending towards maybe 5,000 based on current trend that we're seeing. As I mentioned, we could go and look at all the VMs that are running on here. You'll see a lot of these machines are marked as discovered. That's because this vCenter is used by a lot of people to do a lot of different things, not all through this Morpheus Center server. So we're finding any machines that are running on there. And if I wanted to, I could bring those in and make those managed and make them visible to Morpheus. But we're also bringing through all the things. And this is where you get into that crossover between managing the virtual environment. So somebody's administering VMware and setting up networks, data stores, etc. And then in Morpheus, I have the ability to manage, okay, who can use those? So just to show you something here, here's all my networks. Remember, they're at VLAN 002. That was presented to Pied Piper. This is why, because at this level, I have the ability to manage what tenants can access that network. You can see they're all marked to visibility of private, which means they're all marked to the master tenant Morpheus, except one, which I've also added Pied Piper. That's why I, as Pied Piper, as a user in there, could use that network. And that's the same for data stores and resource pools, etc. So that's our ability to multi-tenant that. Again, that capability is across all the clouds. And again, just to show you, because I have mentioned costs a few times, here, for example, I've got an AWS connection. And again, I can see how much we're currently spending on this cloud. We look like we're going to trend towards a fairly high uplift on our spend this month. but we can see what's going on. We can get a breakdown of what's going on. There's something anomalous going on. We've got a bit of a big spend. It's going to jump up. So one of our administrators will go and have a look at that and work out why that's going on. So there's an indication there of maybe something we need to consider, but we get a breakdown. And I'll just mention is on the public clouds, what we are doing now is we're not just tracking the usage that we see through, remember when we built the instance, we had the price and we're tracking the usage of that. We are also bringing in the invoices from your clouds, from Amazon, from Azure, from Google, and we break those down and give you visibility of those actual costs. Not just here, but we also do that up at this level where we can start looking at the usage. Remember I mentioned the operation section. So I'm just going to spend quick minutes on this. Is we can run reports. Morpheus comes with a wide range of reports that are very usable and split between things like cost usage, infrastructure usage, through to things like helping with guidance, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, through things like resource allocation, analytics of processes that we're running, etc. So there's lots and lots of information. We provide a number of out-of-the-box reports. You can also create custom reports. It's part of that plugin architecture I mentioned, that toolkit. One of the plugins you can add is your own custom reports. So you can do those. You can then, through role-based access control, limit which reports users can run. So you can give them visibility. And when they do run reports, if you want to, you can give them the ability to export the data as CSV or JSON. But possibly more useful is you think about all the information that's been captured by Morpheus, all that usage data, where machines being built, cloud usage, etc. It's all available through Morpheus and can all be exported or extracted, I guess would be a better word, through, for example, our API. And a lot of our customers will integrate us into their business intelligence tools or their invoicing tools to use this Morpheus data as the way that they report back into the business. But if you want to look at it through Morpheus, we have an analytics section, and I can start looking at things like my cloud costs, my group costs, and so on and so forth. So we can slice and dice that data and present it, for senior management who like pretty diagrams and colors and shapes. We can present that in a number of different ways and cut this down by by different groups, by different clouds, by tagging, and a range of other capabilities. But again, all this data is available to you if you want to extract it or present it through Morpheus. And then the final one I'm going to mention here is guidance. So guidance is a really nice tool where if you think about what we've done, I've shown you all of this capability. Once we've built a machine, we can see its performance. We can monitor its internal performance. We know how that machine was built, what plan was used, how much memory, how much CPU, etc. And we can keep track of that over time. And then in Morpheus, we can set some thresholds and we can start making some recommendations. So for example, here we've got a machine running on VMware, and we can see that it's got 16 gigabytes of memory. It's got some compute, but it's not really touching the sides of that resource. And this might be over the last 30 days. So Morpheus is saying, well, you could try, in this case, halving the size of the machine. And we think the machine will still be perfectly serviceable. Now, we're not going into huge, deep AI, market dynamic, trying to get this down to the final couple of CPU or bits of RAM that you need. We're just saying, look, you could halve this machine and it'll probably be okay. We won't do it automatically for you. You can either run a report and get a list of all of these, or you can come in here and hit execute, and we'll go and make that change. Remember I showed you there was that section where I could go and reconfigure a machine. We'll hit the execute and it would go and do that for me. Or I might know out of my knowledge, actually this machine needs to stay at that size, so ignore this, take it off the report list, don't show me this again. But if I hit execute, we'll start recycling that machine, we'll look at it again, and we'll start making recommendations, and maybe we could get that down to 4 gigabytes next time. That might be where it ends up. But this will also do all sorts of capacity planning for you, including things like, well, this machine's just never been accessed. Why don't you shut it down? It never does anything. Shut it down. but it will also do things like whether I need to increase the size. So whilst we're not an infrastructure monitoring tool and we're not going to alert you that a machine is running at 100% CPU for the last 4 hours, we could, for example, suggest that maybe this machine is a little bit under-resourced. This one's starting to hit some bounds on the CPU, for example, and that's crossed a threshold that we think you maybe want to think about increasing the size of that. Thank you very much for listening to this session. I've gone into a lot of detail, but as you can see, I have touched on a small part of Morpheus, but I think the most important part of Morpheus, that core capability, self-service, delivery, and interaction with workloads. If you want to know more, please contact Morpheus, or run a POC, or if you're listening to this prior to installing Morpheus, having bought it, hopefully this session has been really useful for you to understand where you could go with this now that you've got this fantastic tool to help you enhance your capabilities within your IT organization. Thank you very much.